So, inshallah, let me introduce myself. First, I'm a moderator for today. So, my name is Hassan Shukur. I'm a postgraduate student in Turkey, graduated from Marmara University, Faculty of History. So, for today, I'm glad to have our distinguished, very prominent speakers from each corner of the world. First, we have Dr. Maszlee Malik, one of the prominent politicians, I would say, in Malaysia, one of the our hope politicians in Malaysia. So previously, he was the education minister of Malaysia in tenure of 2019 for 22 months after the Malaysian general election 14. Right now, you are in PKR. Am I right, Dr. Maszlee Malik? He's a member of newly and member of Parti Keadilan Rakyat, of People's Justice Party. Entered the party 2 days ago, alhamdulillah. And then we have Dr. Azzam Tamimi, one of the prominent speakers as well. He's a Palestinian, British Palestinian, or Jordanian British Palestinian, and he's attaining PhD in political philosophy, as far as we have known. And one of his work is about Rashid al-Ghanouchi and Hamas as one of the famous organizations in the world. And then we have Dr. Oumaima Kardi as well, the head of Ennahda Youth Abroad. And then, yeah, here we go. So let me introduce our organization, IKRAM as an organization. So let me introduce our organization, Pertubuhan IKRAM UKE. So one of NGOs, non-governmental individuals, what play a very important role in Malaysian politics, that subscribe Islamic agenda, Islamic reform as well. And the ideas that has been proposed is by Pertubuhan IKRAM is an idea of Malaysia as a rahmah nation, or a nation of compassion with a 12 characteristics. First is competence and accountable leadership. Second is an administrative system based on effective check and balance. Third characteristic is a good governance. Fourth characteristic is a fair and just laws. Fifth is knowledgeable, civil and compassionate society. Sixth, strong family institutions. 7, harmonious ethnic and religious relations. 8, a stable and thriving economy. 9, equitable distribution of wealth. 10, sustainable development. 11, safeguarding of citizens' welfare, health and security. 12 is spearheading and global peace and humanitarian efforts. So IKRAM also has its own vision, Malaysia as a Rahmah nation, and mission. First is to invite and guide the community towards understanding, accepting, and appreciating Islam as a guidance in the lives of individual families, society, and the nation. striving to develop an advanced society based on the precise methodology of change in Arabic manhaj target, universal Islamic worldview, and solid education and upbringing, which is known as tarbiyah, by utilizing technology and the best management practices. And the third mission is to cultivate an approach based on mutual agreement and consent. So a bit introduction of IKRAM in general, and IKRAM United Kingdom as a Malaysian, as one of hubs of IKRAM in the United Kingdom, and IDPs as a central brain that advocates political issues among Malaysians in the United Kingdom. So as we have seen, we gathered our speakers from various backgrounds, from politics and academia, which is that come from a various background as well. Dr. Oumaima from Ennahda, which is as a famous with a terminology like Muslim Democrat, and Rashid Al-Ghamnushi, and Dr. Maszlee Malik, and then we have Prof. Azzam Tamimi as well. So we will start by explaining the format. The forum objective is to discuss the issues of Islamism, as we have mentioned in the Facebook and Instagram. First is to discuss a general idea of real politics in Islam and Islam history. Second is to discuss the issue of political ideas in Muslim Brotherhood, one, and its reflection after the coup in the various form of case studies. So as we have known previously, for an example, in Egypt we have easy coup, in Malaysia we have soft coup, and Tunisia we have soft coup as well. And we will discuss this two things between soft coup, military coup, and how Muslim brothers react with this realistically. And third is put a stepping stone. For me, it's very interesting and very important to put a stepping stone into constructing a new framework for political strategies in Islam, or realism in Islam, based on Islamic traditions, based on Islamic biblical sources. How could we construct a new lens called realism in Islam political strategies? So for the format of the forum, we will divide into three sessions. First is, of course, we need to construct a common understanding of Islamism and real politics, how we define Islamism and how we define real politics. And then second round, we will have a contextual reflection of understanding Islamism and real politics. And we will have a question from audience from the third round. And for closing, we will, with a theme of towards a new study, political strategies in Islam, or real politics in Islam. So, without a further ado, I give a first question to Dr. Maszlee Malik. I would like to ask Dr. Maszlee Malik for the first round, what is real politics and what is Islamism? Does Islam permit real politics? What are the examples of real politics? For example, war, peace, treaty and diplomacy, strategic partnership in Islam history, Is Islamism a reactionaristic experimental ideology towards colonialism? So, please, Dr. Maszlee, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Brother Hassan, our honorable guest, Dr. Azzam Tamimi, Kifalak Abu Naji, Dr. Oumaima Kardi, nice to meet you. It's an honor to get to know our friends from Tunisia and all the audience. It's 5 p.m. here. I suppose you guys just finished your breakfast and we're going to have our dinner in a couple of hours coming. But anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to this, I would suggest, an interesting forum with a very delightful topic. But honestly, when you ask me
you have
this question,
7 to 5 minutes, Dr. Maszlee.
Okay, great. When you asked me this question a couple of years ago before I got involved with politics, I might come up with a lengthy academic explanation to it. But at the moment, if you ask me about all this kind of stuff, I would like to be more realistic by saying that when you deal with politics, it's all about how you serve the people, how you serve the nation, how you eradicate poverty, how you make sure that good governance is being upheld, justice is being served, and how you could get rid of corruption and you try to fight corruption. That is the gist of politics, whether you are an Islamist, you are whoever you are, leftist, rightist, or in whatever ideology you belong to. But again, when we are addressing Muslims and those who consider themselves as to be as Islamists, these ethical things and moral basis of their involvement in politics must be clear. The principle must be clear, and their moral compass should guide them in whatever their political, economic, social involvement. As we are referring to political involvement, I would say, like, nowadays, personally, based on my very personal experience, I'm not really excited talking about Islamism or political Islam, or maybe the Islamic political parties, because at the end of the day, when it comes to power, when it comes to money, people are the same. I mean, we are not angels. We are normal human beings. We are very vulnerable towards a lot of wrongdoings, a lot of misconducts, and a lot of things. So this is where I think the very principle of good governance, the very principle of justice is really needed. This is where your inner conviction, your inner, let me say, motivation, whether you are an Islamist or you are leftist or whoever you are, would guide you to ensure that you're on the right path. So I think that's from me for this question. Thank you, Hassan.
So now I would like to thank you, Dr. Maszlee, for the introduction. Quite a challenge, especially the idea of Islamism itself. Now I would like to pass the same question actually to Dr. Azzam Tamimi, and let's see how we have a common understanding about common definition of what is Islamism based on different point of view from a politician and from the academic side as well. So I would like to have the same question as well to you, Dr. Azzam Tamimi. What is real politics? What is Islamism? Does Islam permit real politics? What is example of war, diplomacy, strategic partnership, and so on and so forth? In Islamic history, is Islamism a reactionaristic experiment towards colonialism? Because as we know, after the Caliphate fall, the Muslims trying to find own identity, and still now they are trying to still in experiment mode, trying to figure out their own identity. So without further ado, I pass the floor to the floor is yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much. Well, Islamism is a new term, and it's not really a very good term because it can be interpreted in a variety of ways depending on who is using it. And this reminds me of the previous term, fundamentalism, which was used since the mid-80s onwards to describe a phenomenon. It's the same thing. Islamism is a term used to describe a phenomenon of a return to a better understanding of the role of Islam in our lives. Generally in politics, it means really one thing in the end. It means the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, and whatever groups that are affiliated with them, whatever ideas that spring out of their fountain is called Islamism. This has become evident in the various statements used by politicians, by academics, and by people in the media. Now, realpolitik is also a very bad term because it's, in essence, it means that you climb down from a certain standard of values you set for yourself because you can no longer abide by them. So you become more pragmatic, you become, frankly, you become you become less willing to abide by the principles and the values that you remained for quite a long time defending and struggling for. To probably put it a little less offensive than this, I would say realpolitik is like the rukhsa in Islam. Islam doesn't change, but if our circumstances change, then there is a rukhsa. Ramadan will always be Ramadan. When Ramadan comes, if you are fit and able, you fast Ramadan. But if you are sick, you can break the fast. If you are traveling, you can break the fast. So this is like a rukhsa. But a rukhsa that is so limited and that is also restricted and controlled by the overall set of values. Unfortunately, in politics, people who tend to enter into the tunnel of the realpolitik usually never come out of that tunnel.
Thank you, Dr. Azzam, for the explanation. It's really, what could I say? When you bring the term rooftop, it's like a hole in politics and Islam as well, as a really open, a gray area for a knowledge intervention, especially. So now I would like to ask the same question as well for Dr. Oumaima. So what is, based on your background in UK and in Ennahda as well, what is Islamism? Maybe you could explain as well what is Islamism and real politics with the frame of Muslim democracy and how you guys construct political strategies for making, how you understand politics in general. So please, Dr. Oumaima, this is yours.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum to Dr. Malik and Dr. Azzam. As I'm going to talk from another's position, I think everyone is aware of the 10th Congress, where we attempted to divide between Islam and politics in a way that we left the practicing your Islam as a person within Ennahda is something for the social and like the social aspect and just civil societies rather than the politics itself. It was a pragmatic approach to divide the confusion. They came up with a new name called Muslim Democratics, but whether we actually followed this new term where you can be a Muslim, but you can also be a democratic practicing politics in the real politics, it became a very grey area. What Dr. Malik said is, I truly believe it's very difficult for you to enter politics and not be able to follow what you basically in elections said to the people that elected you, without ending the corruption, bringing new jobs, economical prospect, and all of those becomes blurred lines when you're dealing with other parties that have different ideologies, and especially in a democratic parliamentary, the laws and the bills that passes, they have to have some sort of aspects that maybe don't come back to your ideologies. Islamism was a term that was used by the Muslim Brotherhood in the past, like maybe as you mentioned, because of the colonization. So therefore, it was a response to that to bring back your identity. But there was no attempts of revamping, redirecting the ideology, growing the ideology with the current terms, the current climate, especially after the Arab Spring. That probably led to majority of the stuff that we've dealt with in Tunisia. That obviously led to this and what they call a coup, and a constitutional coup. But obviously we'll go through that in more details later on. Personally, and I think a lot of people that have entered politics, we've practiced politics in many countries, know that you cannot group them together. You can be a Muslim with your Muslim heritage background, but when you come to practice politics, you have to think about everyone, whether the people that voted you or the people that haven't voted you, which means you have to understand the other prospect. This doesn't actually come far from Islam itself. And Islam is it's a way of life, and it's adaptable, as Dr. Azzam has said. So it allows us to change our views based on the situation that we're in. And we know this from ahadith, we know this from the ayat that when they came down on Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they were coming down based on situations, and the meanings of them meant what was happening at that time. So we have to think about that as well when we enter politics.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Oumaima. So we have a really common down definition, of not like definition, like a general statement, what is Islamism, and some aspect of it, for example, that mentioned by Dr. Azzam and other speakers as well. So we will jump to second round, which is we don't want to play around with definition, but we would like to have some reflections on the ground, what has been happening. We have Dr. Maszlee from Malaysia, which represents Malaysian politics, and Dr. Oumaima represents also Tunisian politics, or in a wider scale, we would say North African politics, I would say, and Arab and Middle East as well. And Dr. Azzam
I cannot understand. By the way, the noise is just too annoying. I think you need to check your headset or mic, because it's just too noisy. I cannot follow you. It's too noisy. It's coming from your side, yes, not from the others. Try now, without the set. Try.
Dr. Azzam, can you hear me very well? Sorry for the technicals, because I'm planning to have it somewhere else.
There's some sort of interference from your side. There's some sort of interference. Either you have
we can hear you and the additional noise too.
Yeah, either you have something that is causing the interference next to you. I don't know, a mobile phone or something, some instrument that is on. Because when the three of us speak, it's very clear.
Yeah.
There is no problem. There is no noise, no interference.
It sounds more like a fun fair or amusement park.
No, it's just too annoying. I'm tempted to leave.
I feel you.
They should have tested this before they went on air.
Yeah. I think the normal practice normally they came, half an hour earlier and do all this kind of tests before we go online. So now he left us.
Yeah.
So how are you, Abu Naji?
Wallah, alhamdulillah. We've just finished picking the olives and squeezing them.
No, we'll try because there is some technical problem. So I'm supposed to have it at some other places, but the place is closed, and I'm trying for 2 hours to find the place, and my house is on renovation. Like somebody come for renovation. So I'm so sorry for this technical problem.
So it's a harvesting season in Jordan, apparently.
Yes, the olives. I come every year this time for the olives.
I miss Jordan.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Oumaima, are you in the UK or back in Tunisia?
No, I'm in the UK currently.
Yeah, I miss Tunisia too.
I grew up in the UK. So
Okay.
I miss it too. I haven't been there for 4 years, so because of the COVID.
The last time I went there was in 2013 or 2014, before the presidential election. Was it 14 or 13? Yeah, somewhere around there.
14. Yeah.
Before COVID, BC.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. Sorry, while has been sorting out the technical issues, I'll take over temporarily. Is this a bit clearer?
Well, that's a bliss.
Much better.
Okay.
It's a bliss.
Yeah.
Compared to the hell we were in.
I'm very sorry, but we'll try and solve it. So from where we left off, I think we were going into the first round of questions, and the first one was directed at Dr. Azzam. And I think what he was going to ask is basically how could Muslims use soft power and also hard power as their intellectual understanding to implement Islam. So the context of this is where we talk about how traditionally Baitul Maqdis or Jerusalem was this source of regional and international power, if we remember. So, previously to take over, say, Baitul Maqdis, you had used hard power, so like during the Crusades and so on. But after that, you also had sort of what we saw as more soft power or diplomacy. And that's kind of ancient history now, very much related to currently, but we've sort of moved on where we've got nation states and so on. So I'm guessing within our current context, how could Muslims, and here the question is actually especially Islamics, but I know we've sort of moved away from the term right at the beginning of the talk. How could we use hard power and soft power to actually implement the ideals that we're chasing after?
Is this is addressed to who?
To you, Dr. Azzam. So it's more about we've got various different types of power in the world today. If you look in the context of nations, you've got hard power like say military power and so on, but you also have soft power. So whether it's say from diplomatic channels, or whether, for example, culture and so on. So how would how would we as Muslims try to use that to our advantage within the field of politics?
Well, see, we are not different from any other human being. We use whatever is available, whether you call it soft or whatever power. You need to achieve your objective, so you look for whatever methods, whatever tools that are at your disposal. What distinguishes, what would or should distinguish a Muslim from a non-Muslim is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us a set of standards, a set of values that we adhere to. And this is a real challenge, because when we enter into politics, we will find that we are fighting wars we don't have probably the means of winning, and we find ourselves compelled to make concessions. Some of these concessions are halal, but some are not halal. Some are kosher, but some are not kosher. And that's why we need always to remind ourselves of what set of values we adhere to. Jihad as a term includes all types of efforts made by a human being, whether it is physical or intellectual or whatever. But of course, we need to be always wary of the limits that we should not exceed. Let's talk about some practical examples. Israel today occupies Palestine. The Zionists are so powerful. They are supported by the West. The Palestinians are so weak. They are not supported even by their closest Arab brothers around them. That does not justify saying we cannot win, we cannot liberate Palestine, so let's enter into Camp David like Sadat did, or enter into Oslo like Arafat did, or enter into Wadi Araba like Jordan did, or enter into the Abraham Accords like the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco did, at the expense of our own religion, at the expense of our own values, claiming that we have to try and achieve what is possible, and this is what is possible. We may not be able to achieve, but that doesn't mean that we give up on our values. And that's why we have the value of martyrdom. And that's why Rasulullah ﷺ told us that the best, that Sayyid al-Shuhada'i Hamza, the master of martyrs is Hamza, and a person or an individual who stands up to a tyrant, admonishes him, and gets killed for it. So sometimes you give your life for a cause. You don't save your life at the expense of a cause. And that has to be clear, because unfortunately, in the experience of some of our Islamist, so-called Islamist brothers who entered into politics, there appear to be no limit to the concessions they make. Our brothers in Morocco signed the deal with the Zionists, claiming that this was going to get them the Western Sahara, or the Moroccan Sahara, as they call it. Some other brothers elsewhere condone things which Islam can never condone. There is nothing wrong with saying, I am sorry, I cannot achieve this objective. Okay, no problem. People will excuse you. But don't claim that because you cannot achieve a certain objective, that you have to take off your clothes and you have to change the color of your skin, and you change everything that you believed in for so many decades.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Azzam. Yeah, I don't really have anything to say. We'll come back to that, I think, maybe in some questions from the audience. The next question, actually, I'll address this one to Dr. Oumaima. And yeah, I'll just read it out. So Ennahda has previously adopted positions which were seen as unconventional for a political party with Islamist roots, but I think they were guided by the realities of the political space in Tunisia. But having said that, these actions haven't always won, Ennahda friends, whether it's from what you would think of as their traditional supporters or from the opposite end of the political spectrum. And I think, other parties have also experienced the same thing, where you try to meet someone on middle ground, but then your core group of supporters don't like it, and the other side don't think that you're actually doing anything. So could you discuss the challenges which face a party like Ennahda, operating within Tunisia, and what we're coming up to nearly 10 years now. So what's been learned over the last 10 years with regards of, actually putting your ideas into reality?
Okay. So the term of Islamism or Muslim Brotherhood umbrella, with Ennahda, when they entered the politics, what's happened was that the people that voted for them were expecting promises that was related to the ideology, the Islamist ideology. The elections of the first ever elections in Tunis allowed Ennahda to be the only party that had the majority. And they decided to, due to belief that if there was a coalition, it would allow better transition to a democratic country and a democratic system than if they led as a single party. However, the reality is that they did get the most votes. Whether people voted for them because they actually understood the ideology, the background of Ennahda, who they were, what they promised or what they wanted to do, or whether it was a backlash response to Ben Ali regime. So people have to remember that pre-democracy, Ben Ali's regime limited mosques, limited learning Quran, limited Islamic studies. There was quite a lot of tension around religion itself. So people didn't feel, women weren't allowed to wear headscarves. I know many people that have left the country, not because they were from Ennahda, not because they were Islamists, but because they were either shuyukh or they wore a headscarf. So they weren't able to study in Tunisia. So you had the Islamists and you had the people that were just religious, that were also a part of the people that got attacked by Ben Ali. So when the elections came on, as a natural response, they voted for the most person that was far away from that regime, which is a natural response. You go for the most change in the fastest route. Very typical behavior, even if you study it in psychology. If you want change, you always go to the extreme. So that's what happened. When that happened, the people that were against the political idea of Ennahda, against a, let's say, a Muslim democratic, if we're going to go by what Ennahda used as a term, to be in the elite group of politics in Tunisia, running the country, they would use the term Islamism as a slander, like, well, they're Islamists, they're backdated, they don't understand what the country wants. If people voted for them, well, they don't know, they are uneducated, they don't understand the modernity of the world. We are modern, like we're supposed to be a modern country, and so forth. When Ennahda compromised or passed, positions like, for example, we had MPs that attended alcohol brewery in Tunisia, which became a big thing in the Arab world. Or how could a party from an Islamic background and attend something like that, despite there was lots of discussion about that. There was other stuff as well, including the inheritance. If Ennahda compromised at any point, the backlash didn't come from the same people that used to slander the political party for not being modern, for not changing with the modern world and modern concept, would also say, well, they're traitors to their voters. So it was a double sword. Regardless where we positioned ourselves, there was always going to be an attack. I think if we understood that earlier on, maybe the values that we had in as singularity, not as a party itself, each person stood by their values and just did what they felt right, would have changed where we are now as a position. The reality is, the more that we didn't stick to our values, with every single election, we lost more votes. And that's because people voted for the party because of the promises and the values that they thought this party would bring forward as a Muslim or a political party with Islamic background. That's what people voted for. So when you do not provide that, and on top of that, you're not providing the simple stuff that the politicians always promise, economical prosperity, stability, all of that, of course, is going to cause a drop in your elections. And the minute that the opposition felt that they had more on their side than we had on the streets we're talking about, that's the minute that these so-called coup that's happening now took over. Yes, in Tunisia's timeline, it took 10 years, but in other countries that have, like Egypt, it took much less than that. In Morocco, it led them to compromise their stance on the Palestinian qadiyya, as I think, as Dr. Azzam Tamimi would say, the North Africans have always had a very strong position on the qadiyya for the Palestine. The minute that they compromised on that value, they lost the elections, as we also saw in Morocco. So people, they don't really, in reality, the lame people who vote, the normal people, not necessarily, following a specific political party or anything. They vote for values. They vote for people that keep their promises, the people that, when they say they're going to do something, they do it, which again, it comes back in Islam. We're supposed to do that. That's supposed to be our core. If you promise, you abide with the promise. If you take a position, whichever position, you try to do the maximum. So we have compromised on that, which led to where we are now. And that's how it's a very simple thing. This happens everywhere in the world. The fact whether we were Islamist or not doesn't change how politics run. People vote for you when you do stuff, not when you say stuff and not abide with them. And that's what happened in Tunisia, really.
Thank you. That's been very insightful. Which, in a way, I guess, for us who are interested in politics, we sort of follow every single crisis. For the person on the street, that's probably not what they do, like you were mentioning. Okay, so the next question, before we go to questions from the audience and also questions which have already been submitted by them beforehand, we'll ask Dr. Maszlee Malik just specifically about something which happened in Malaysia, which I'm sure you would be familiar with. So we had I guess what you could call a non-violent or a soft coup, where we had Langkah Sheraton, as they call it, or the Sheraton move. So there were 3 ministers who had sort of what we would call, Ikhwanist background, Dr. Zulkifli Ahmad, Dr. Mujahid Yusuf Rawa, and also yourself, where basically you were forced from your positions as ministers. And there was also another Muslim brother, Haji Rashid Hasnun, who had jumped ship to Bersatu from, at that time, from PKR to Bersatu. And he was also involved in that coup to secure his power. And at the same time, I think at the time they were saying you were almost involved in negotiations, during that period. I think they had some pictures of you in various different people's houses and so on. So just about this scenario, one of the observations was that these politicians who sort of came from our tarbiyah, if you would call it that, they had failed to secure their power and position during Pakatan Harapan's era. And by choosing idealism and principles, you had to leave your positions. So what can Islamists or Muslim Democrats reflect about this dilemma of power and idealism in the Malaysian scenario? I think it's sort of it's a very similar question to what I asked Dr. Oumaima. And could you tell us a bit more about how backdoor politics works, and how we can deal with that in the Malaysian context? And I think, yeah, so to distill all of that together is, what can we do to, I guess, to capture, secure, and stabilize the power that you actually get without actually selling your principles? And yeah.
I'm not really sure what do you want from that question, but I need to make some disclaimers. Number one, by saying that you mentioned 4 names, including myself, as people with representing Ikhwan, which is not true. I don't belong to Ikhwan Muslimin. And all those 4 names that you mentioned, they belong to 3 different parties. I belong to Bersatu, which is a nationalist party, the very first party that I've joined actively in politics. And the 2 other names, Zulkifli and Mujahid, they belong to, I suppose, what they trying to claim themselves as a Democrat Islamic party, just akin or similar to Ennahda. And Rashid Hasnon, he belongs to Parti Keadilan Rakyat, which is a reform and democratic party.
At the time.
Yeah. So I think that generalization that you made is not very accurate, and I don't think it's good. And number 2, I'm not sure how in the world you're trying to compare between the Malaysian situation, especially when you're referring to Lanka Sheraton, to whatever happened in Tunisia or in any part of the North African and Western ASEAN countries. It's totally different. In Malaysia, it's not between a democratic regime against, a non-democratic regime against democratic opposition, or it's not about counter-revolution. It's not about usurping of power by, certain non-Islamic group. It's very intricate in Malaysia, because if you're talking about this new, this Lanka Sheraton, on one side, you have the existing new government that managed to win the election for the very first time in 60 years of Malaysian history, which comprised of Amanah, a Democrat Islam party similar to Ennahda, and you have a Democratic People's Party, which belonged to Anwar Ibrahim, and you have Democratic Action Party, which is mainly dominated by the Chinese and by the non-Muslims, and you have my own party, Bersatu, which is nationalist party. So we won the election in 2018, and this coalition has been ruling for 22 months, but unfortunately, my own party left that coalition to build a new coalition that led towards the collapse of the former government. And they are establishing a new government which comprised of the old regime, UMNO, another nationalist party, along with an Islamic party, PAS, and a lot of other small parties. So if you have to say it's a kind of Islamism, Islamists against non-Islamists, or democratic against non, that did not happen in Malaysia. Lanka Sheraton was very unique. It's about the shift of power from one alliance to another alliance, a shift of power between one coalition to another coalition. But the issue remains about the shift, or the like we say, I mean, in Malaysia we don't use the word shift, but we say the betrayal of my own party to the the former coalition that managed to establish a government in 2018, and a group, and a betrayal of a group of people from Parti Keadilan, from Justice Party, who later joined my party, along other parties, including PAS, to establish a new government. So myself, along with the former Prime Minister Maszlee and 4 others, we refused to join that betrayal, or al-khiyana, we call it in Arabic, because we have our own agreement, we had our own understanding, but it's clearly my party betrayed the coalition to move with Islamic Party, with UMNO, the former government, which is heavily known of its corruption, with its wrongdoings, led by the kleptocrat Najib and whatever. So based on the moral values that I adhere to, I refuse to, first and foremost, to betray the coalition. And number 2, I refuse to be together with the kleptocrats, with the corrupted leaders represented by UMNO, and with the pragmatists, let we say, valueless, moralist Islamic Party of Malaysia. This is where I think the danger of, playing with religious sentiment or religious ideology. People like PAS, they're very pragmatic in nature. They can move from one side to another. If you're talking about moving to power, PAS has experienced becoming alliance to almost all parties in Malaysia. And to a certain extent, I mean, it's no secret at all for many people that they are associating PAS as the best whore in the town. I mean, they have been with almost everybody, So that's a reality. And that is real politics, if you're referring to, which for me, it's against the values that I believe in. It's against the principle that we adhere to. Regardless whether we are Islamists or whether we are nationalists or whether who we are and which party we belong to. But one thing that makes us different from all these political animals is the values that we uphold, that we adhere to, and we strongly promoting. That's number 1. And number 2, serving the constituents who voted you in the election. I mean, by all means, when they voted for you and they put you in power, you must serve them. And number 3, you must have a clear vision for the nation. You must have something not only to offer them, but you strive for them. As for myself, I fully concentrate on education. And until now, I keep convincing myself that I'm a politician instead of an educator, because in the parliament, in the House of Commons, I keep talking about education more than any other things. And for me, that is the way forward. It's not about you giving khutbah or sermon inside the House of Commons, but when you leave the House of Commons, the Parliament, you're dealing with others, you are compromising on a lot of principles, a lot of values. I don't think that is Muslim is all about, whether you're wearing imama or jubba, whether you are adhere to certain Islamic ideology. But the moment you lose your values, the moment you started to compromise on every single principles, and there's no value for you, because it's going to be a slippery slope. Even a small thing, you try to compromise and you got addicted to do more and more and more. And I think this is the issues, and these are problems involving a lot of those who claim themselves as Islamic parties or Islamists, whatever, who trying to sell religion in order to get votes or in order to come to power. So that's my very honest personal point of view. As for me, if you ask me, I don't really bother whether you're in which party you affiliate to, but the most important thing is your personal convictions, your, let me use some jargon here, your ontological belief that guide you, the principles that you adhere to. And you need to pay a huge price for that. But again, if that is your decision, and if that is your oath to God that you want to serve in the best interest of the nation, you want to serve the people, then you should prepare yourself to pay whatever price you have to. Yeah. And for me, that is what Islam is all about. Wallahu alam.
Fair enough. Thank you. I think, yeah, nothing else to add really. Right. So we'll actually go on to the questions from the audience. I'll just switch the screen layout. Okay. Let's just see. Are you able to see it as well, or do you want me to give you a separate link? For those who are just joining the stream, any questions to the speakers, we are taking it via Slido. So I'll post it again. Yeah. So yeah. So if you go to slido.com and then you type in this code, then it'll come up to here. You can scan in the QR code as well if that's easier. And after that, if you see a question which you think you want to be answered, you can just click on the thumbs up button. That will push the question up. As you can see there's actually about 13 questions, but then But yeah, we'll go based on the ones. We'll go in turn. Hopefully, I think some of them we might be able to combine, but if not, then we'll see how far we go. Is that all right? Okay. Right. So I guess the first question at the top is just saying, the Muslim Brotherhood is almost 100 years old now. Does this mean that a new idea is needed in regards to, Tajdid or Islamism and so on? Especially now, I guess when the Muslim Brotherhood first came about, you didn't really have that many democracies within the Muslim world, but obviously now it's very different. So I guess we'll put this question to Dr. Azzam first.
Well, the process of revival and renewal is continuous. It doesn't stop. And this is based on ijtihad, the effort to come up with new interpretations and new ideas. And nobody can prevent anyone from pursuing that path. Yet, so far, the idea that the Muslim Brotherhood embrace has continued to be a unique one, in the sense that it presents a comprehensive picture of Islam. It's a moderate vision. It's mainstream. It's not complicated. It's simple. It's easy to understand. People identify with very easily. And that's why people who have been unhappy with the Muslim Brotherhood, or who left the ranks of the Muslim Brotherhood at one stage or another, and tried to set up something new, could not really provide that sort of alternative. But of course, nobody can deny anyone the opportunity to look for ideas. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, yes, it has been around for nearly 100 years, but it has not failed. It could have succeeded. It has been met with a global war against it by local forces, by regional forces, as well as international forces, all joining arms together in order to prevent a genuine transition from dictatorship to democracy at the hands of a mainstream Islamic movement, because that would have been attractive to so many Muslims around the world. So the war is far from over. The struggle is continuing. although some individuals feel defeated, but that's their choice. I mean, if people want to give up, that's their choice. But as a movement, I think it is still there, despite the deep wound it has sustained, and it is likely to come back again. It was hit hard in 1949, then in 1954, then in 1965, and at different other occasions. Yes, 2013 was the hardest, the toughest, the most vicious, but I believe the movement is still capable of coming back, inshallah.
Okay, thank you. Hold on, let me just see what I can get it back on the screen. Yep, okay, great. Right, so I think what we'll do is we will keep this, right? And I guess, even though I direct it to one particular speaker, if, for example, say if I ask Dr. Maszlee, but then after that, either Dr. Oumaima or Dr. Azzam want to add on from there, please, feel free to just add in before I start talking, or just cut me off and say, I want to add on some more stuff. So the second question is, could I get an opinion on the current situation in Afghanistan, and also the confusing situation of Islamism in Malaysia, where it's Islamists involved in corruption? I suppose we could get opinions from everyone in regards to what's happening in Afghanistan, but also specifically in Malaysia, whether you'd like to answer that, Dr. Maszlee.
Yeah, I don't have any substantive information about Afghanistan, and so I think I refuse to give any comment on Afghanistan. But talking about Malaysia, Islam is involved in corruption. I think whether you are Islamist, whether you are nationalist, whether you are secularist, you are a normal human being. You're succumbed to a lot of pressure. You succumb to a lot of desireful temptation. But again, just like I mentioned earlier, it will come back to your inner conviction. If you believe that you want to adhere to certain values, if you are Muslim, you believe that corruption is bad, corruption is very sinful, and you don't want to get involved with, you must stick to it. And you cannot justify it by quoting certain verses of Quran, or by taking some sayings of the Prophet just to justify the corruption, the wrongdoing, the misuse of power, or whatever. I mean, a lot of guidance that we could learn from the Prophet Muhammad SAW himself, and a lot of practices from the Khulafa ar-Rashidun when it comes to accountability, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to good governance. So as Muslim, I think you should adhere to that. The problem with some Islamists, they thought that because they adhere to certain Islamic quote unquote ideology, they thought that when it comes to politics, it's all about this juristic and mechanistic issues. It's all about hudud, it's all about establishing Sharia law. So when it comes to corruption, they compromise. When it comes to wrongdoing and misuse of power, they compromise. When it comes to accountability, I mean, I still remember how the president of Islamic Party saying that there's no such thing as accountability when he was asked to declare his assets and to declare his income. Not only him, but I mean the whole MPs. He said, the position of the Islamic Party then is to refuse the declaration of assets by the Islamic Party's MPs, because they said it's not mentioned in Quran, and it is a practice of the communists, which I just couldn't comprehend. And this is not the only case of past. I believe other Islamists that normally when they came into power, they started to justify things. And so this is where I really cautious myself and cautious a lot of people, the dangers of misusing Islamic slogan and abusing so-called Islamic ideology when it comes to politics. At the end of the day, it's all about your personal conviction. It's all about your moral value and your moral compass. And this is where, as Muslims, in whichever party you're working with, you affiliated yourself with, you must try to adhere to the very core principles of Islam. I mean, Adalah, the justice, you're talking about equity, you're talking about good governance, you're talking about avoiding corruptions, serving the people, and putting people's interests before your own. I think this is what I believe the spirit of Quran, the maqasid of Quran, and maqasid of Sharia itself, rather than involving with the details and involving with all the legalistic issue. But when it comes to practice, I mean, you're far away from the ideals of Islam or the moral of Islam itself. That's my very personal point of view.
Thank you. I guess whether either Dr. Azzam or Dr. Oumaima had anything about I'm just asking because the question is there just about the current situation in Afghanistan, whether either of you have been following it with any detail.
Yes, of course, I've been following the events in Afghanistan, but not, I wouldn't say in detail. But the general picture is that the Americans were actually defeated in Afghanistan after 20 years. Now the Taliban is back. The Americans and their allies are saying to the Taliban, you either become like us or one of us or one of our lackeys, or we're going to impose failure on you. This is what they do to people they don't see eye to eye with. Although the Americans admitted defeat and withdrew, as the American press reported, the CIA and other American intelligence agencies are still quite active in Afghanistan because they want to impose failure on the current regime, that is the Taliban. Now, unfortunately, around Afghanistan, the shape of the Muslim Ummah is not at best, and that increases the challenge with regard to the Taliban. Have the Taliban changed over the years? Yes, definitely. They've changed for the better, as I see. Their discourse has become much better. Their vision of the world has become clearer. Their understanding of politics has become more subtle. And this is really helpful. But of course, there are thousands of Afghanis who were born and grew up under American occupation and who probably never knew the Taliban and probably like or hate the Taliban on the basis of hearsay rather than on the basis of actual experience and contact. And that is another challenge as well.
Geopolitics of Afghanistan is very important to, depending on the the countries that share the borders. So we're talking about Russia and so on. Where they want to stand with Afghanistan will change what's going to happen in the future. And I think one thing that I've noticed in during the Arab Spring, a lot of people focused on their nation, just like I'm talking from Tunisia's concept, and completely forgets that geopolitics is very important. Where we lie in the world and what our political position within the world also influences our stances on certain stuff internationally as well. And that's the biggest challenge that the Taliban is probably going to have, is where they stand within the borders of Afghanistan. What are they going to do? Who are they going to probably make new allegiance with, and who are they not going to make allegiance with? And it's going to be interesting to see. However, I have nothing more to say with regards to Afghanistan internally. Like nationally, they have to go through their own story, and we'll see where it ends, because it's different for each person.
Okay, so we'll keep that as well. Right. So we'll ask one question to Dr. Oumaima first. So this is the second. Oh wait, sorry, I'll bring it back up. Yep. So this is the second one. So Dr. Oumaima, your advice for Muslim youth to enter the political realm, what we need to do and be prepared for, and what threats are waiting for us.
Okay, so as a youth, I mean, from my background, I luckily enough grew up in a family that was very politically orientated. So I guess even here in the UK, we, grew up among many families that also have very great knowledge of the politics of the Arab world, who also were involved in the UK politics as well. So they weren't, immigrants that just lived for living. They were also part of the civil society here as well in the UK. The more experience you have in the civil society, in the political hierarchy as well, among your own party, in just democracy generally, understanding what democracy means, what politics means. The UK, they teach kids as young as 5 years old in schools to elect a candidate that represents their classroom. That's teaching young generation elections, how to do elections, how to vote, transparency, all of this, accountability from a young age. So when I entered politics at the age of 2018, I can safely say that I have 10 years experience of just elections and all of that from where I grew up. In the Arab world or in Tunisia mainly, there isn't that. And that's what the main challenge was. Luckily, I lived abroad and I was representing the youth abroad. So the youth abroad, they understood how to carry politics or how to be an active youth member of a political party. However, internally there was struggles because you're talking about people that under Ben Ali's regime never practiced politics in its stance. They've always practiced the opposition, being the opposition, but never being opposed to. So there's that challenge in itself is different. And the more experience you have in working along other parties, working along, especially in civil societies, with people that have different ideologies. Here in the UK, I'm a member of multiple organizations, Tunisian organization, that have very secular background, maybe even anti-Islam generally background. But that meant that I understood them and I knew what they want to do, what they don't want to do, what they like and what they don't like. So it allows you to be very understanding. So when you take a stance, as I'm talking just a person, I'm not talking as a political party itself, it comes from credibility. You know that where you stand as a person with your party and also with other people's. That's the main thing. Dialogue is very important. Whether you have in Tunisia, they started trying to do debate, national debates, international debates, even broadcasting the last election, the presidential elections as the debates. And that was what led Tunisians to vote for Kais Saied, because he was, let's say, well-spoken and knew how to present himself. And so actually debate is learning how to debate, learning how to put your point of view across without making the opposing a person as a criminal in front of, respecting them, so that you can be respected is very important as well. And I think that starts with the youth, and as you grow your skills, your soft skills, you become a better politician in future, if that's what your aim is.
Okay, thank you. I guess start early and expose yourself to various, if not political, then civil society. Okay, so right, let's see. So it's just okay. I think that the sort of inbox is getting clogged up with a few questions to Dr. Maszlee. But let's just see. Right. I just wonder whether you want to put the nail on the head first, Dr. Maszlee, before the inbox starts overflowing with more of those questions.
No, I think I when I gone through most of the questions, it's very contextualized and it's very localized to Malaysia. And we won't be fair to our two speakers because I would be spending, I mean, the rest of the time dealing with our national issues. That wouldn't be fair even to the topic of our forum today. Yeah, maybe we can make a special session with me later on to deal with all those questions, perhaps.
All those particular questions. Okay, no,
Yeah.
that sounds like a good idea. Tanya Dr. Maszlee, as we would call it. Fine. Okay, right then. So, yeah. I guess this one, or okay. So there are a few questions specifically about sort of Islamism, or bringing Islam into politics and so on. So I'll try and combine them, but I'm not sure. If you want to correct me, please feel free to, Dr. Azzam. So the first one at the top about what's the greatest challenge in bringing real politics in Islam to the fore, and the other thing which I wanted, if we could get answered at the same time, is the current Islamism model that's being implemented suitable to be adapted, or any improvements? Yeah, and a lot of questions really about whether, about democracy, Islam more generally, whether, this question, has the democratic experiment failed? Do we need a better way? Or how are the ideals of Islam applicable in modern democracy? What's the view of Islam in democracy? If you'd be able to give us some of your thoughts on that, Dr. Hassan.
Well, let me first deal with the question of Islam and politics. I mean, any attempt to deny that politics is an integral part of Islam is a sinister attempt. It's an attempt to change the nature of Islam. Depoliticizing Islam means turning Islam into another medieval church. When Islam came to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, immediately the Arab recipients understood that it was meant to change their lives, changing all aspects of their lives that needed to be changed. Of course, there were things that were okay, in conformity with the natural fitra, natural instinct of humanity. But things where humanity deviated, needed to be corrected. Justice, human dignity, caring for others. How can you do any of this without involving politics? Or should we just leave politics to the crooks, or to the communists, or to the liberals, or to the secularists? In my opinion, it is part of the war against Islam itself to say that Islam has nothing to do with politics. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتُ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. This is a characterization, a very specific characterization of what Muslim men and women are about. They believe in Allah and they enjoin the good and forbid the evil. If you enjoin the good and you forbid the evil, that's the backbone of politics, because you're going to tell people who have gone wrong that you are wrong and you have to be corrected. If you defend the oppressed, that's politics. If you call for an end to corruption, that's politics. If you call for equality, that's politics. Politics is how we run our affairs. And therefore, if you say that if you are a practicing Muslim, or if you are an Islamic organization, you should have nothing to do with politics, that I consider to be part of the war against Islam. Now, there is no model for Islamism. As I mentioned earlier, the term Islamism itself is problematic. Let's focus on Islam itself. We are all Muslim, but we may have different contexts. We may have different problems. We may have different priorities. The priorities of the brothers and sisters in Tunisia are different from the priorities of the brothers and sisters in Malaysia. That's okay. That's understandable. And we try to deal with this in a very rational manner. What is the difference between being a Muslim and a non-Muslim? It's the set of values. See, but by being a Muslim or an Islamist, as people might be labeled, that doesn't mean that you don't go wrong. Of course, we are human beings. We can go weak, we can go wrong, we can be corrupted as well. And that's why we need to have accountability, we need to have transparency, we need to have reviews every now and then, and we need to have a set of values that constitute a frame of reference. We have to have that frame of reference. It's not up to anybody to claim that in my circumstances, it's okay, I can lie, or I can cheat, or I can deceive, or I can betray a cause. You cannot do this. Justice is justice. Human dignity cannot be reinterpreted. You cannot allow torture in one context and forbid it in another context. Torture is forbidden in every context. See, this set of value is absolute. And whether you then practice politics in a manner that Ennahda does in Tunisia, or in a manner that a certain political party in Malaysia does, you will be judged according to this set of values, and not according to successes or failures. Because sometimes you are forced to fail because you refuse to compromise. Like our brothers in Morocco, if they said to the king that they were not going to sit with the Israelis and sign the deal with them, probably the king would have sacked them. But that would have been the real success, because they would have adhered to their principles and even increased their popularity, because they thought success meant remaining in power. The people eventually evicted them from power. So it's adhering to the values that really matters, and not certain changeable measures of failure and success.
Fair enough. Thank you. And I guess to pair it together, because it sort of links in nicely, what do you think is the greatest challenge then in bringing sort of Islam in politics, or putting that in, or putting these values in? Because I think we talk a lot about it, but then we've still not quite gotten there yet.
Well, the biggest challenge is to stick to the values, because there are so many attractions out there in politics. Some people, when they meet the king, they become so willing to give in and to make compromises because they are in the company of the king. What the hell is the king? The king is just another human being. Who is this president, and who is this person, and who is that man, and who is that woman? We are all human beings. So just stick to the values. And if you are requested to do something which contravenes and contradicts your values, you say, sorry, I cannot do it. My values won't permit me to do it. There are even non-Muslims who stick to these values, and they pay a heavy price for doing this. Take the example of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, for instance. He was deposed, he was conspired against, simply because he maintains a position on Palestine that he was not willing to change. On other issues as well, on the issue of, for instance, the use of torture, the issue of violating human rights anywhere in the world. The human rights of a Muslim in China are no less sacred than the human rights of the Muslim in Palestine. So we cannot have double standards. We have to be, and this is the problem with some of us when we enter into politics. Say, we need China. It's okay. Let's go to China. Oh, we need Russia. Let's go to Russia. Oh, we cannot, but Iran is an important ally. Okay, you can play politics with all of these, but not at the expense of causes, not at the expense of the Syrian people, not at the expense of the Uyghur, not at the expense of people who are being persecuted and oppressed. To what extent can we maintain that standard of values? That's the biggest challenge.
Fair enough. Thank you. Right. Sorry. We'll put this back on. Okay. So. Okay. To Dr. Maszlee, if you could answer the one at the top where, you know, I think like we keep saying the term itself is problematic, but people keep using the term. So how do we regain the narrative of Islamism as it's now being controlled by Western politicians or media? For example, where Macron says Islam is in need of an enlightenment. Could you give us your thoughts on that, please?
No, is the question addressing about Islamism or is it about Islam? Because just like Dr. Azzam mentioned earlier, that Islamism itself is a term that has different definitions and interpretations, depend on who defines and who interpret them. But when it comes to Islam, there's only one Islam, you know, and amongst the challenges that we're facing nowadays, the misrepresentation of Islam, not only by the anti-Muslim or the anti-Islam, but also by the Muslims themselves. So we need to work harder in order to explain, in order to represent the real Islam, even to the Muslims. I mean, a lot of Muslims even confused about Islam itself. So we need to do a lot more of media works. We need to do a lot more of engagement works, and some sort of narrative propagation. Yeah.
Propagation of narratives then. Fine then. Yeah. I don't know whether Dr. Oumaima or Dr. Azzam had anything else to add to that.
The Western politics has an agenda. And it's not a current agenda. Historically, it's been there since their righteous way of colonizing the world, or they've given themselves the upper hand to control the world. Since then, even the way the nations were divided and how they were divided, where they've created Israel, for example, where it is. This is why I'm telling the importance of geopolitics is also plays a role. All of the way the countries were divided, what was allowed and wanted, the way the colonization of the British Empire and the colonization of the French was completely different, even historically within one country. If you compare the British colonization in Egypt, it's not the same as it was in Syria. It always came down to what they can take more from. And the narrative of Islam, or the narrative of politics, and how they've derailed the concept that politics and Islam cannot be combined, was mainly started since the Crusades. So a lot of people have to go back to the Crusades and read more on the Crusades. They've lost many Crusades due to the fact that we were one nation. It wasn't countries, it was a one nation. And the minute that they understood that they can play people against others based on their nationality, based on their language, based on the barriers, the border barriers, was the minute that they started winning the Crusades. And that's when the colonization started right after that. So if we go back to the history, we would understand where our misconception of Islam and democracy started. Mainly, if you look at the laws that run the Western society, they all come back from Islamic foundation. The just war, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu were, made rules when we enter a country in a war, or in a state of war, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. That is a UN national laws now for just war. Okay, so you cannot say that Islam and democracy can be combined when there are laws that countries implement in their own that comes historically from Islamic background, and it comes from the even education, like generally just the educational system itself as well comes from the way that we started the education back many years ago, agriculturally, everything. So when people say that, oh, Islam is a problem, like Macron, they try to diminish history. They try to recreate a history. We know in history we learn the person that writes history is the one that conquers. So therefore, that doesn't mean it's the true history. So you have to go back and re-examine the evidence, as we we learned in history classes. The main thing that we need to understand is how politics was run during the Islamic era. What was done. So a lot of people assume in the Western society that Islam means dictatorship, because Western society have placed these dictators on the Muslim society, and therefore we've for many years lived under dictatorship, under monarchy, whether in somewhat dictatorship in that as well, for many years. We're talking about hundreds of years. It's not something new. And but that wasn't something that was there before. When Islam used to, or the people that come, from the Khalifa and so on, when they ruled, that wasn't the case. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, used to make sure that there was not necessarily elections, but let's say establishing the members of the people that ruled the politics at that time every 2 years, whether they were succeeding or failing, it doesn't matter. They regenerated the positions, or revamped in a way, because new people will come up with new ideas, and therefore it allows growth. That's the concept, which is what elections is like. And there was a limit to quite a lot of stuff. Whether we talk about the Sunnah, we talk about living the life of Islam, we're talking about this, but we never go back to the reality of what it was at that time. I have these arguments sometimes about the role of women in society, the role of women in politics, and Muslim women even. And then they always bring Saudi Arabia as an example. Women can't drive, women can't, or so on and so forth. And I'm like, well, in technicality, if we go back to historically in Saudi Arabia, in the location, I'm not talking about the country itself, but the location, women probably had more rights before even Islam came down than what women have now. That doesn't make it. That's nothing to do with Islam in itself. It's just the country, how they wanted to choose. Sayyidina Khadija radiallahu anha, she was a businesswoman. She traveled. She done lots of stuff. So that's not something that Islam limited her on that. Sayyidina Aisha, the Islam didn't limit her to become a scholar in herself. So what we need to do is redirect the narratives. When someone comes and says to us, oh, Islam says this, to make it clear that there is culture, there is people, what they want us to assume Islam is, and there is history. And history comes to our side, where, I come from a medical background. When the evidence points you to a place where it's a diagnosis, you go where the evidence takes you. You don't go to the other side. And history is our evidence. History in Islam is our evidence for us, and therefore we show it to them. We present it. It's still there. They don't want it. They can't hide it, because if we go historically, if we talk even in the medical terms, Ibn Sina is a Muslim scholar that recreated medicine to the modern medicine that we know in this day and age, but they try and change his name to make it a Latin name, and the thing that doesn't change the fact that he was a Muslim scholar. That is the fact. So you go back to the facts and represent them. I think where we lack how we present our information. We have always been in a mode of defense, and when you are defensive, you do not know how to elaborate your feelings well, and you always go to feelings rather than evidence. And I think that's where we need to learn. Or if it goes back to the previous thing that I said, where we need to learn how to debate really well, because that's how we can protect Islam in itself and actually show and present that Islam is part of politics.
Thank you.
Sorry, I took so long.
No, it's fine. Thank you. That's kind of, we're here to listen to you guys talk rather than listen to me ask you questions. Right. So let me just prune this list a bit. Do you agree that most Muslim countries are moving towards political decay? If so, how should this current generation be shaped to tackle this deadlock? So I guess it's a multi-step question. Whoever would like to answer, really.
Well, I think what we are witnessing nowadays is a new revival, but this revival is being resisted by powers that stand to lose as a result of any success in this revival. This is what Al-Quran tells us about tadafu', the interplay, the continuous interaction and interplay between different powers. What we saw 10 years ago in the Arab world, we thought was going to make it. We thought we were at the threshold of a major change. Unfortunately, that was aborted, but only to prepare for the next stage. So there will be another stage. So yes, the situation might be tough. Dictators are still there, and they're becoming increasingly brutal, but that is also a sign of their panicking, of their frustration. So I think it's just a matter of time. The future is for Islam and for this ummah, but this ummah needs to make more sacrifices. The one major lesson that we learn from the previous wave of revolutions in the Arab world is that the greatest battle we are fighting is the battle of awareness. The dictators use tools in order to misguide and misinform the public, and that was one main reason for the abortion of the revolution in Egypt, and then later on in other places. And we need to do more work. We need to work a lot more in order to create better awareness in the minds of people, young and old, women and children, women and men, in preparation for the next wave. But the next wave is coming definitely.
Great. And in terms of how we should shape our current generation, any thoughts on that as well, Dr. Azzam? Or?
Well, you cannot shape a different generation from the way any good generation needs to be shaped. We are Muslims. Our frame of reference is the Quran and the Sunnah. And if we are to succeed in this world as well as in the next world, we need to shape our children and our next generation according to the values of Islam. And this is why there have been Islamic movements. This is why people struggle. This is why people give their lives for this cause. We have to continue to do this. In my youth years, I was very active, moving from one place to another, doing this and doing that. Now it's my children. It's the turn of my sons and the turn of my grandchildren as well. We have to bequeath this. We have to teach them. the greatest failure, in my opinion, is for someone like me, an activist during his young age, who leaves behind children who don't give a damn about Islam or the Muslims or about the Ummah. No, they have to care. We need to inculcate this in them. This is their future. And if you care about the Ummah, you need to care about your own children and bring them up in the way they care about this deen, about this Ummah.
Okay. Thank you. Dr. Maszlee, I've had a question, but then it wasn't, because it was too long, they couldn't actually put it onto Slido. And I think the ones looking after the Slido, we didn't quite know how to actually make it smaller. So I'll just read it out. It's also available on the within the chat box to you. So what is your opinion on the term post-Islamism used by certain scholars? So, for example, Asif Bayat, Oliver Roy, and so on, which explains that Islamism has failed and a new Islam, well, the current Islamism has failed and a new generation of Islamism is already taking place. In the case of Malaysia, how do you see the survival of, say, for example, Ikhwanist parties, movements, or NGOs? Do you agree that Islamism has failed and doesn't have a future and that we need to move on? Or are your thoughts a bit different on the matter?
I think I've answered this question in many of my writings, and you can refer them. A few of them been published by Ilham Book Center, which I totally disagree with the idea of labeling Islamism, post-Islamism, and whatnot. When you're referring to the movement, or Dr. Azzam has mentioned earlier, normally people coin Islamism to the Ikhwan and those who sprung out from Ikhwan womb. I think the issue is the Islamic ideology that derived from Ikhwan itself, it keeps evolving. And Dr. Azzam put it very rightly when he said that even the Islamism evolved into different spectrums, to different variants, if you like to use the word. And the same case happened to Malaysian experience or experiment, as an example. Tunisian experiment would say that it shows clearly on how the Islamism has evolved throughout the years and throughout the places. And one good thing about this Ikhwan ideology, like Dr. Azzam mentioned earlier, it sticks to certain principles that easily could be understood. But again, the principle is there, but certain approaches that been proposed by the founder of Ikhwan and those who were together with him might change throughout the time and places. There are certain issues that have been brought by the founder and those surrounded him then that have been addressed, that been strongly adhered by the earlier generation of Ikhwan, might not be, suitable or might not be realistic when it comes to different geographical places or even time. Time and space factor play a very important role to that. And you talk about Malaysian example, I would say that we too have our own experience and experiment, and we keep evolving. What I've gone through in the past 4 decades or ago is different from what your generation is experiencing now and what my kids are going or are experiencing now, and what my grandchildren will be experiencing in the future. They'll be living with different geopolitical issues and circumstances. They'll be dealing with different needs and necessities of their zeitgeist. And definitely one good thing is the principle sticks there. It will forever remain. So this is where either Dr. Oumaima or Dr. Azzam mentioned clearly it's the Quran and Sunnah, the teaching of Islam, the values of Islam will forever remain. Islamism, or whatever you like to coin it, will have its evolution, will have its own dynamics, but the core principles of Islam will remain forever.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, so it's not going back. Okay, fine. To Dr. Oumaima, just the question at the top. So, is there a metric by which you could measure whether the separation of political work and da'wah in Tunisia has succeeded?
So in Tunisia, the society itself is very mixed. Within one family, you can have a person that prays and half the Quran and all of that, but then also a person that's completely, we can easily say an atheist. There's that big spectrum, and that's within one family. So actually, the concept of taking dawah and just leaving it for the people, the specialist of a dawah, and the politics on its own, I think it was a fundamental important thing to do for the political party, because it was going to cause lots of deadlocks in politics. It was going to cause lots of issues, like even the laws of how to advertise for the elections, and it was going to cause lots of tension and always a spotlight on the party. And generally speaking, even if you look at the way the dawah should be, it shouldn't be forceful. It shouldn't be, like in Islam. Personally, I believe it shouldn't be forceful at all. I've heard a story before of a way of the dawah. It was a very simple way where someone encouraged someone to just attend the prayers, not pray, just attend, just come and witness it. And every time you witness it, I'll give you something, as a gift from me. And that, that person, when they left the country, they were in one of the Muslim countries. When they left the country or returned back, they missed the adhan, they missed actually attending. So naturally, he went seeking for it, and that allowed him, in the future to convert to Islam, or revert to Islam, whichever way you want to phrase it. So that was a very simple, soft dawah. It wasn't forcefully, bringing someone and attending, and just teaching them how people are Muslims is the best way. Your akhlaq, the way you present yourself, is the best way of dawah, not organized and structured. So in Tunisia, it was going to be impossible, even if you wanted to structure it, even if you wanted to make it part of, the question was a matrix of how to split the dawah from the. It wasn't possible. You can't even convince your own brother to pray. So how are you going to do it on a national format? And in Tunisia's background is very mixed, historically. Even we, if geographically, we are the highest tip in Africa. Historically, we had the Ottomans, we had the Romans, we had the Andalusi people. When they escaped Spain, they also stayed in Tunisia. We had many, even the French colonization. It was very brutal in Algeria, which is next door to us. In Tunisia, it was very soft. You couldn't even feel it. They've left after our independence. They left maybe 45 years or 50 years after that. That's how you never notice them. So we have very mixed backgrounds. We have a Maziri background, we have Arab background, we have European background, the Turkish background within us. So the way that Islam is, And Islamically, funny enough, we have Kairouan as the capital city of Islam, but a lot of people don't know that Tunisia ارتدت من Islam, يعني, as a country, if we're going to take it, multiple times. So, you know, they went far away from Islam so many times. So the background of Tunisia is completely different, which is why that was the stance of Ennahda at that time. Whether they abided to what they said, and again, it comes down to the person. You have many people. You have an older generation. You have the younger generation. The younger generation easily can divide because they don't know it. They've never lived it. But the older generation, you have people that actively were part of the dawah in Tunisia. So you're now coming to these, like, even, you know, we know them as shuyukh, you know, Sheikh Muru, you know, we know them as their shuyukh, and you need to come and tell them, actually, if you want to be part of the party, you're not allowed to be who you are. That's very difficult to divide it. And that's where the confusion was. So even though we came up with this terminology of Muslim democratic, even though there was an attempt of dividing the dawah from politics, it was difficult to actually abide to that because of the way the party was structured, and also the way that people felt that the party was in charge of that dawah, because there was no one else that can take over it. And you know, that's the issue here. In Morocco, though, it was complete. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Azzam.
No, you finish first. You finish first.
So I was going to say, in Morocco, the way that they went with this is that they split it as two different hierarchies, or two different things. They had an NGO that was completely structured for the dawah, like an actual NGO that was associated with the political party, and somewhat you can see them when there was organizations in the municipals, and for example in Rabat or anywhere else, that they come together as one as the political party and the other, and they create something together. However, it was an NGO and a political party. In Tunisia, we didn't have an NGO to do that. So yeah, so that's what I was going to add.
Okay, sorry, I think Dr. Azzam wanted to.
Yeah, I was at the Ennahda conference in 2016 when they made that announcement about the separation of the da'wi and the political, or the religious and the political, if one may say so. And I was confused as anybody else, because there was a lot of confusion at the time. And now, with the passage of time, I managed to understand a little bit of what was going on. I don't think it has anything to do with Tunisian peculiar situation. I mean, what Oumaima describes of Tunisia applies to every other country in the region. I mean, I can say the same thing about Palestine. What's so different between Palestine and Tunisia in terms of the civilizations and the powers, the imperialists, the invasions, and the movement of people across history? I think, had it not been for the coup that happened in Egypt in 2013, Ennahda movement would not have taken that step. That step was taken by Ennahda under enormous pressure from various powers to dissociate itself from the Muslim Brotherhood. Traditionally, Ennahda was part of the Muslim Brotherhood. And the same as At-Tajammu' al-Yamani al-Islah, the Yemeni Islah party, who were also an integral part of the Muslim Brotherhood movement. They came under pressure from the Saudis, especially when the war started, to dissociate themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood. These movements felt that what happened to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was going to happen to them. Whether sooner or later, it was bound to happen to them. I even learned that they were explicitly warned by certain Western envoys that if you don't do this, you're going to be crushed too. So it was probably an ijtihad, an idea they thought was going to self-preserve, that was going to save them from the fate or the destiny of the Brotherhood in Egypt. And now we know, of course, with hindsight, that it didn't do them much good. Qais Said came, and he is even worse than Sisi. he's just as bad as any other dictator. I was even shocked when we were in Tunisia in 2016, when some prominent members of Ennahda who were with us in London felt they needed to appear on TV and say Ennahda was never part of the Muslim Brotherhood. You didn't have to do it, even if you don't want to associate with the Brotherhood. You didn't have to lie, because it's a lie. It's not true. Some said famously, so many of them, including Sheikh Rashid Ghannouchi, we have eventually left Islamism. What does Islamism mean? It means the Muslim Brotherhood. So I think the fear and the panic felt by the leadership of the Ennahda convinced them that this was the way to save themselves. Well, it saved the movement for a few years, but not for much longer, because even though they were giving this impression that they were not going to mix politics with da'wah and they had nothing to do with the Muslim Brotherhood, those who hated them did not believe them. They continued to accuse them of being Ikhwan, of being Islamists, of being this, of being that. Not because they were not Democrats. There are no Democrats within the House of Islam like the Tunisians. They are the closest to a democratic practice. And I did my PhD on this, and it's a book that is published now, even in Malay, not only in English. But I think they failed the test, and I'm sorry to say this, that they failed the test of the moment when there was so much pressure on them that they thought, let's try and change our skin a little bit, that might save us. It didn't save them.
The concept of splitting the dawah from the thing, actually many have called upon it from 2011, the minute the revolution. However, whether the decision, executive decision, shall we say, was pushed further after what happened with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Of course, you have, like I said, with looking at the different path or different situations across, we have to learn from others' mistakes, shall we say, or learn from other things. The issue Ennahda really faced is that there was no understanding of this divide. Some understood it, some didn't. Some came from it, and
because
and
it's
if we see,
fake.
even
Because it's fake.
even if
It's
we
not
see,
true.
even
There is no
even if we
division. There is
see,
no such division in
yeah,
Islam. There is no such division.
exactly, that's what I, yeah. So even if you see the people that have left recently, whatever, are the same people that have called upon it from earlier than the Mu'tamar or the conference that happened, or the congression that happened then. So over time they just felt, it's not going to change it. Like you said, it's fake, or it's not possible. You can't group them, or you can't split them. So therefore we'll just leave. That's the best option out, But it was a discussion before. The influences of international pressure, of witnessing what happened in Egypt, of the pressure internally, the attacks, the constant attacks in Tunisia. All of those together created that sudden decision. Because again, the other problem was that they make the decision was made, but there was no education of what it means, or what it can, or was there any preparation for it? You can't just go into it without no preparation. Like I said, there's no NGO as a substitute for it that was going to take on the role. There was no actual education of these people, that the conflict of what you were saying, that they come up in the media, those same people, when they were attacked on the national TV, the first thing that they would say, us Islamists. So the terminology itself wasn't even changed, and like you said, it is because it's not even true. It's difficult. These people believed it all their lives, that they were part of the dawah. They are doing this to protect, their country, and they need to protect the Islam in their country and everything. And then suddenly they were a political party. Suddenly they had to face the pragmatic approach of
Sister
politics,
Oumaima,
and
not
real
only
politics,
that,
and it's changed.
not only that, the struggle of Rashid Ghannouchi and his comrades, his brothers and sisters, has been against the forced secularization of Tunisia all the while, against what Bourguiba did, against what Ben Ali did. And then suddenly there are members of Ennahda who think of Bourguiba as a hero, and that even go and visit his tomb. And Bourguiba was an enemy of Islam, was an enemy of the Ummah. Bourguiba was the one who wanted to force the Tunisian people to break the fast during the month of Ramadan, claiming that it was against production, against development. How can we struggle against secularism, which is a Western imposed idea on us that came with the colonial armies, and then suddenly we make a call for secularism? Because the separation of Da'wi and Dini or Islami, the separation between the religious and the political, is a secular idea. Is what Ataturk did of a crime against the Ottoman Empire. It's what Bourguiba did as a crime against Tunisia, Nasser against Egypt, every other tyrant in the region. This is our fight. We fight against secularism because secularism is the enemy of humanity. And those who think that they can make friends with secularism are fools. It can never happen. It can never happen.
So that's
it's very interesting
because and
it's
again,
very...
what you were saying is so true, because if you see the votes right after that conference in the electoral votes, they went down, and they slowly went down. The more the values, again, it comes down to values, as I think we as the panel all have agreed to this. Like, I was very before I came, I was very attentive of whether we're all going to be on the same page or not. I think we're practically on the same page. When you lose your values, it's not going to work. Regardless, like you said, you're going to be seen as someone that keeps jumping the boat, or someone that keeps changing their values based on what's in favor for you, and that in itself does not allow someone that votes for you to feel safe, to feel protected. And that's what these people want, the normal people. That we're not talking about the elite political people. We're not talking about people that are as part of this political party, that even within the political party they've left because of this confusion, because of this. Like, how could you? These are the same people that were arrested in prisons, that were tortured for these values, and suddenly you tell them, actually, you're not allowed to have those values. They're not part of our mainstream. And like I said, there was no alternative. Had there been an alternative, they would have shifted to that alternative. When an alternative was created, if we see currently in the what led to this coup that we're living in, the alternative was such a socialist thought that came out, which is they were very in the way that they were going by in the parliament. They were very socialist, and they were whatever the people that wanted on the streets were. Whether it was going out to the secular people and attacking them on the streets and stuff, very extreme socialists came out as an alternative, because there was nothing else in between. When someone is pushed to the corner, they're going to go to the extreme, and it's what Dr. Azzam Tamimi is saying. It's very true. When you try, and we've got this saying in Tunisia, if you try and remove your skin, you're not gonna survive. So that's literally what's happened, and it was a way of extending our time within the elite political group in Tunisia. We were never accepted, whether we want to believe it or not.
I think Dr. Maszlee wanted to say something.
No, it's totally different.
Yeah.
No, it's totally different planet from which we are living in Malaysia, where this is not the case. If people are afraid to declare that they are Ikhwan in Indonesia, in Malaysia, you find all spectrums, all political parties, all the Islamic organization are competing to make a claim that they are Ikhwan. They are the representative of Ikhwan in Malaysia, including some of, and everybody competing each other to show that they are more Islamic than another. Even when they're taking bribe, they try to justify it with certain quotation from Quran or certain hadith. When they are, they misuse or they abuse people's money from government coffers or from taxpayers' money, they always have dalil on that. Everybody competing each other to make a claim that they are more Islamic than another, which is not the case in the Middle East. So when, you know, the very unique problem in Indonesia or in Morocco or in any other places, it never happened in Malaysia.
Yeah, but
So
that only happened after the coup in Egypt, not before the coup in Egypt. This wasn't the case before the coup in Egypt. It was after that.
Yeah. So in Malaysia, whether it's before the coup in Egypt or after the coup in Egypt,
you are too far away. You are too far away.
The context is totally different. Just like I mentioned earlier, people are competing to show that, you know, one is more Islamic than another. So, but this is where I think for Malaysian audience, I keep reminding people of the misrepresentation of Islamism or misrepresentation of Islam itself by whether they self-proclaim themselves as Islamists or whether they are not really Islamic, but trying to show to the voters, trying to show to the people that they are Islamic. I mean, this is the situation that we have in Malaysia, in which case we need to come back to the very core values of Islam rather than the cosmetic and the slogans or, you know, the cosmetic Islam. That's like how I would like to mention it. You know, so this is where I think we should go back to the very basic of Islam itself.
Fair enough. Okay, so it's really interesting, and I think we were just sort of getting into it. We don't have a lot of time left. So actually, this last question it's not a question from the audience.
It's not over yet. It's just like the program. It's not over yet. I thought we've been talking like forever.
Well, okay. So this is the last question, and if we give to each member in turn, it's also been pasted onto the chat box inside the studio. So based on different definitions and sort of the contextual reflections that we've had so far today, can both lenses produce a new framework for you know, how Islam sort of operates or in relation to real politics? I think if we give it to Dr. Maszlee first, and then Dr. Oumaima, and then Dr. Azzam.
I mean, for me,
5 minutes if you need it.
Islamism and
for me,
realism.
be realistic. I mean, go back to the basic of Islam. You know, whether, just like I mentioned earlier, wherever you are in Malaysia, I'm not talking about the situation in Tunisia, in Egypt, or everywhere else. But in Malaysia, let's go back to the basic. You know, go back to the values of Islam. That Islam taught is very clear when it talks about justice, talk about dignity of human being, when it talks about accountability and transparent. That is the values, that is the teaching of Islam. It doesn't matter which party you belong to, it doesn't matter which group you're coming from, but the moment you compromise with all these things and you started to justifying them with certain verses of Quran or certain quotation from Prophet Muhammad SAW, you are going to destroy Islam. You're not going to serve Islam. You're not going to serve the nation at all. So back to the basic, you know, live the values that we are taught with. And this is where IKRAM, as well as other Islamic organizations, this is what we're being taught in our circles, in our dawrah and whatever. We were taught, I mean, to be honest. We were taught to not to take bribe. We were taught to deliver amana. We were taught to be, you know, faithful to the cause, to help people, you know, to serve people, and to put people's interests before our own. And in whatever tribulation, you know, sometimes people are talking about imprisonment and all those sort of things, counter-revelation. But trust me, the biggest tribulation is when power and money comes to you. So if you adhere to those core values, then the real tribulation will really, you know, shaking your foundation. But then again, you must know that you're not going to live in this worldly life forever. You're going to be standing before Allah, and that is the real challenge that we should be thinking of. Allahu Alam.
Thank you. Dr. Oumaima?
So again, I think what we always try to do is box ideas into compartments and compartmentalization. This whole like Islamism, realism, the reality is if Islam is a way of life, it's not structured deen. I know we ourselves know it's not a structured deen. There is ijtihadat, there is fiqh, different backgrounds of it coming. What each country goes by different, applying differently. We are unique in the way that Islam itself is unique as a religion, in the way that it was created and the way that it carried on the way it is now. If we try to find a specific pathway that allows Islam to be part of politics, then you do not understand what Islam is, or the foundation of Islam, or the fundamental core of Islam in itself. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam probably was one of the best politicians I probably would know. But like if we go back to how do we create the perfect politician, Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was one. The Sahaba as well were very great in what they did in terms of politics, like how they dealt with conflict, how they dealt with opposing ideas, how they dealt with managing the society in different ways. And we just need to learn that. I think what the past years that we've lived in is that we know the outside structure of the Islam, or what we know the main, or the cover of it, shall we say, the cover of Islam, but no, we haven't, because the information is easy for us to just quickly search and find. We haven't actually indulged in Islam itself and actually found out what's the reason for this ayah that came down at this point, and this hadith, and the reasons behind it, the reason, the concept of it all. And because when you understand a concept, then it's actually very easy for you to adapt that concept to the modern era that we're living in, regardless whether if the politics change, regardless if whether it's all the countries are democratic or not, regardless whether we have different nations, different languages, it was very easy to adapt. And I think that's the good things that all of us here in the panelists, we've all agreed that that's actually it. If we go back to our fundamental core in Islam, we find actually it's very easy to live by it in this modern age. It's not hard. It's not made to be hard, regardless of the changes. And I might be wrong in the translation, but I believe it's Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu said, do not raise your kids the way that you were raised, or something along those lines. And maybe one of you can correct me if I am wrong, but that means that you allow the change to happen. If you always stick to how it was before, then it's not going to allow the change, but then it allows it with the core, the fundamental core, because what you raise your kids is you're raising them on the values, what's right and what's wrong. And as Dr. Azzam said, I do also know his children as well. So yeah, we all grew up with how our parents raised us, but we have those values embedded into us. So regardless where we are, whether it's I'm in Tunisia or in the UK, those values don't change, because it can be based whether I'm in the British society or the Tunisian society. And that's the important thing that any parents can do. And if you forget that, then I am sure you can teach yourself those values again. So it's not a problem, and there should be no problem in Islam with politics at all. It's something that maybe we've created in this modern society.
Thank you. Dr. Azzam?
Well, you see, for me, Islam is the most realistic religion, the most realistic doctrine, the most realistic ideology. I mean, imagine how many times in the Quran we are told, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, or لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما آتاها, that Allah does not force you to do that which is not within your own capacity. It means either that whatever Allah ordered us to do is within our capacity, or it means that during tough times we are permitted, we are exempted from certain obligations. And this is what we call a rukhsa, license, permission to not violate, but not to adhere. I gave the example of fasting during the month of Ramadan. If you are traveling, you are exempt, and you do it again once on another occasion. If you are sick, etc. If you are dying out of hunger, you're allowed to eat al-maita, or to eat something which under normal circumstances you are not allowed to eat. This is realistic. However, the word realism in philosophy means something else, and that's my contention with terminology. People use terms at ease, but each term was born out of a context and has a history and has certain connotations. So we need to be really careful. Islam is not Machiavellian. In Islam, the ends do not justify the means. That's hypocrisy. That's called nifaq, hypocrisy. And we are warned in Al-Quran that the hypocrites are the people at the lowest level in the hellfire. So hypocrisy is something really very dangerous. Islam is against corruption. Islam is against lying, against deceit, against betrayal. And therefore, if realism means that you do away with values in order to become more expedient and more able to achieve certain material things, that's not Islam, that's not Islamism, that's not permissible. But if it means that you come up with new ideas to tackle new problems, to deal with new situations, that's the essence of ijtihad in Islam. We have no problem whatever that is to do with it. But I need to finish on one important note. What has happened to Islamic movements, starting from Egypt onwards, was not because they did something wrong, was not because they could have done better. Yes, they could have done better. Probably there were certain things they shouldn't have done or said. But that's not the reason for the coups that we have seen. That's not the reason for the abortion of the Arab revolutions, for the Arab Spring as it is called. The reason for this is that the balance of power is not yet in favor of the change we have been seeking to achieve. We need to continue the struggle until we tilt the balance of power in favor of the change we desire. And that requires more sacrifice, more adhering to the values that we believe in, rather than giving them up, claiming that we have failed. And by the way, what's his name? You mentioned the French writer. What's his name?
Oh, sorry. Go further up.
Oliver Roy. Oliver Roy wrote his book before the Arab revolutions. And I remember at the beginning of the Arab revolutions, I thought Oliver Roy must be now hitting his head with his shoe, because Islamic movements did not fail, have not failed. Oliver Roy writes as wishful thinking rather than really writes as someone who knows exactly what's going on. So be careful what you read and how you interpret what you read.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jazakumullah khairan katsira, to all of our speakers today. It's certainly been a pleasure and definitely a challenge in terms of moderating this talk. We're at the end of the program. On behalf of the organizing committee, we'd be very grateful if you could fill in the feedback form, either via the URL or the QR code. Once again, thank you very much, and we apologize very sincerely and from the bottom of our hearts for the technical problems that we had earlier. I'm sure it'll go into the feedback form, but we're very sorry once again. There were a few questions, or quite a few questions, which we weren't able to answer. So what we'll do is we'll try and collate it and see, whether we can get the panelists to give their thoughts on it, maybe in writing. And yeah, we'll try and get it out to you. In terms of that, the very specific questions about Malaysia, I think Dr. Maszlee has very kindly offered to have a separate session, but we'll need to speak to him about it in terms of the planning of the where and the when and so on. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you once again, Dr. Azzam, Dr. Maszlee, and Dr. Oumaima for your time. and also definitely for your thoughts. Inshallah, we'll end here.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.